in a very volatile, unpredictable world at the moment. I think we'd all agree with that. It's pretty hard to make predictions in terms of the next 10 years, in terms of where we're going to be. So I thought that I would start by making my predictions and see whether you would agree with me. Because I have some fairly, only a small number, 4. Hopefully this works. Does it work? I'm stuck. Ah, very good, thank you. Great. So, yeah, is that working now? Yep. So I thought if we look 10 years into the future, I think I could put my house on 4 predictions only. I don't know whether you're going to agree with me, but I think the first one I'm absolutely certain about is that China's economy will double in the next 10 years, whatever happens. And you might think that's quite a bold prediction, because if you think about it, doubling China's economy from where it is now, it's already a big economy, the second largest in the world, to doubling again, not to mention doubling another 10 years after that, that's pretty significant. And you might say, how can you be so sure about that? And I think I'd say to you, why don't we think back 10 years to 2007, when we were in the height of the GFC, the global financial crisis. China's exports had fallen off a cliff, and everybody said that's the end of China as it transitions from an export-led economy to an economy that's led by domestic consumption. But here we are 10 years later, and they've achieved that. Not only have they achieved that, but many Chinese companies have become global companies. Household names like Alibaba, Huawei, Haier, Tencent, these are all companies that now roll off the tongue as big international players. 10 years ago, people weren't talking about them, and they are now. So let's go forward another 10 years, and I think we can pretty much be safe in saying that China's economy will double from its current level by the year 2027. And that my second prediction is that China's middle class will double as well. There's currently about 300 million people in China who are defined as middle class. These are people who can now afford plasma televisions, who can eat different types of food, who can afford foreign holidays, who can buy foreign properties. There's 300 million of those now. In the next 10 years, I reckon that will double to 600 million, and then I think it will be about 900 million 10 years beyond that. So I feel pretty confident about making that prediction. I'm also confident that China will build the One Belt, One Road. Now, whether they'll finish it in 10 years, hard to say, but I'm pretty confident that that is not just a pipe dream made up by Chinese bureaucrats. This is President Xi's #1 priority, to build the One Belt, One Road. And I would say in 10 years' time, you could put your house on the fact that it will be pretty much finished. And then lastly, I think that in my view, I think we're living through something of a global leadership vacuum now. And I think the BRICS will step into that space and become the global leadership group. Now, you're probably thinking, well, hang on, the BRICS, isn't that now dead? Like, wasn't that something that was a few years ago? Isn't that all over yet? Well, no, it's not all over. And actually, I think it's only just begun. And they just met just this week in Xiamen in China, the BRIC leaders. There are a number of announcements that have come out of that. I think you should look at that. But they've pretty much all committed their support to President Xi's One Belt, One Road. And as you know, most of those countries, certainly Russia and India, are very much part of it anyway. So this group of 4 are now, I think, stepping into a global leadership role. And we should all be paying attention to that. So again, coming back to the BRICS, you're probably saying to yourself, wasn't that BRIC thing, isn't that all over yet? No, it's not. And I think it's not because I think we need to look back at the fundamentals and the reason why they are the BRICS. Those of you who've heard me talk about the BRICS before will know that I often talk about the fact that there are 3 key economic inputs to generate global growth for a single country or single economy, and they're land, people, and capital. And I don't think many people would disagree with that. And I know we've got an economist in the room who's just won the prize. Hopefully he would agree with me that land, people, and capital are pretty much the big 3 economic inputs. And if we organize the world in terms of those 3 things, if we look at countries with over 2 million square kilometers of land, countries with a population of 100 million or more, and countries with a GDP of 600 billion or more, and we reorganize the world in terms of those three things, I think it's interesting to find that whilst there are maybe just under 200 countries worldwide, there are only 26 that fit into these three circles. And you're probably starting to think about which 26 those are. 20 of them, of course, are in the G20. And here they are. And in terms of our region, the Asian region, the countries, of course, that are most important in terms of these three economic inputs are China, India, Indonesia, and Australia. They're the big four in terms of this region. And that sits, I think, very nicely in terms of what we're here to talk about this afternoon. Of course, the BRICS are there for a reason. They are the big four, with the US, of course, that sit between these three circles, countries with a lot of land, countries with a lot of people, and countries with a certain amount of capital. Australia, of course, has land and capital, but it will take a big Australia policy to get Australia to 100 million or more to get into the middle. Indonesia has people, 240 million people. It has capital, but it doesn't have enough land to be in the middle. There are various groupings of countries coming together, like the Mints and others, that all sit in these different circles. But I think it's important to remember why the BRICS are important. And actually, it's quite coincidental that for the first time since the acronym was invented, all four of them are now growing together, which hasn't actually happened before. For various reasons, one or more of them have been in a sort of recessionary phase. Jim O'Neill is a good friend of mine. Jim is the guy who came up with the BRIC acronym, and he actually said he liked my land, people, and capital idea. He thought that was quite neat, actually. But he said, actually, there's only two things that matter. And he said, people and productivity. If you've got enough people and you can make them productive, you're going to be a big, fast-growing global economy. And so when you think about people, I think it's also important to think about where the people in the world sit. I used to live inside that circle when I lived up in Hong Kong in the 80s and 90s, and I used to travel around China and India and many parts of the world that are inside this circle. And of course you saw lots of people, but you didn't see much productivity, you didn't see much growth, you certainly didn't see any innovation. And these were basically rural, regional, poor countries, many of them. Now that's what, 30 years later, that's completely changed now. Most of the world's growth, most of the world's productivity, most of the world's innovation is now going on inside that circle. And look at where we are, the royal we, in terms of all of us in this room, in relation to that circle. And if I'm right about China's economy doubling and their middle class doubling in the next 10 years, we all need to be paying attention to what's happening in China. So, what is happening in China? Well, China has three main priorities, and these are the three: going out, going west, and going green. And that's relevant to all of us, because we can all get involved in terms of managing their priorities. China is an unusual country because it generally sets a plan, usually a 5-year plan. They set a whole lot of goals and milestones and ideas, and they debate them furiously, and then they put them into a document that gets debated throughout the country. They bring it all back, and then they launch it. And generally, when they say they're going to do something, they do it, which is quite unusual by Western standards, have a government that actually tells you what they're going to do, and then they actually do it. China actually does that. And if you look back over previous 5-year plans, you'll see that generally, 90% of the time, they achieve the milestones and targets that they set. So when they tell us that they're going out, going west and going green, or building a one belt, one road, whatever it is, you can be pretty sure it's going to happen. And many people have doubted them, and they've continually exceeded people's expectations. So let's look at those three things one by one. So going out. So this is basically outward and inbound investment since 2003. So the grey bar represents inbound investment to China, money coming in. Outbound, the yellow bar, represents money going out. And if you look at this chart, as you can see, for the first time in 2015, outbound investment exceeded inbound investment. And you're probably thinking to yourself, yeah, but hasn't that all finished now? Aren't they reining it all back in? There's capital controls, the money, they've stopped the money going out. Well, yes, they have, and this is why. Because if you look at the 2016 number, it's got completely out of whack. So in the process of encouraging and motivating Chinese companies to go out and invest in new industries and new countries and new currencies around the world, as always with the Chinese, one or two people have gone a little bit over the top. So, for example, Mr. Wong at Wanda started buying casinos and cinema chains. And various Chinese entrepreneurs have perhaps got a little bit ahead of themselves. And so the Chinese government, for lots of sensible reasons actually, has started to rein it in to get that yellow bar back to a more consistent, long-term, sustainable trajectory. Their goal is to increase outbound investment by 10% a year, which on a base of about 150 odd billion is a relatively large amount coming out every year and investing around the world in infrastructure, in agriculture, in mining and resources, and in other sectors too. So going out is very much still alive, but it's just been slowed down short term to try and get it back to where they want it, which is on a sustainable long-term basis. And when we look at Chinese investment around the world, we've certainly seen a lot of it down in this part of the world, in Australia, $65 billion invested in our mining and resources sector. And now we're starting to see investment diversify across the region into infrastructure, into real estate, and into other sectors that I'm going to talk about as well. But going out has really, again, just begun. And going back to my slide with the yellow bars, as you can see, they're consistently looking to continue that going forward. I mentioned the One Belt, One Road, and I assume you all know what I'm talking about. And I think everybody in this room this afternoon, during the course of the sessions we're going to have, should be thinking about how whatever initiative it is, whatever country it is, how it's fitting into President Xi's vision, which is to rebuild the part of the world that to some extent has missed out on globalization. So the South Asia region, the Central Asia region, Eastern Europe region, the eastern part of Russia, has to some extent been the corner of the world that has so far missed out on globalization. And as part of this One Belt, One Road, in joining all of these maritime routes, rail routes, road routes, high-speed train routes, is starting to take trade routes from the South Pacific, which of course is of great interest to everybody here, all the way to Europe and even to the UK. I was in the UK in June, and they were very excited because a train left Barking, which is not the most glamorous part of the UK, and went all the way to Yiwu in central China, full of goods, products, and things to be sold into the China market. And Theresa May actually said that the UK, as a result of this, or actually what she said is that Barking is on the end of the One Belt, One Road, which caused a lot of amusement amongst my British mates. Anyway, we're still talking about China going out, and now, of course, their focus is on key priority sectors. We've seen this huge investment into mining and resources, which of course has had its boom perhaps. It's still there and it's still longer term, but it's had its boom. The next boom, of course, is now into one of their next strategic priorities, which is food security. I deliberately put up a picture of oranges because I led a mission of citrus growers from Australia to China. And I don't know if you're interested in this, but in Australia we grow about 350,000 tons of oranges. We juice about a third, we consume about a third, and we export about a third, so that's about 100 million tons. And of the 100 million that we export, about 10% goes to China. So 10 million out of 300 million, so pretty small. So we turn up in China and we went and visited markets. We went to wholesalers, distributors, retailers, high-end supermarket chains. We talked to everybody in the food distribution chain in China who were interested in importing Australian oranges. We gave them these numbers, the 350 million, the fact that we export about a third and about 10 million go to China. And of course their response was, but we want the lot. We want the whole lot. In fact, we want you to double it. And of course, our citrus growers, not necessarily very lovely people, but not necessarily investment bankers, found it quite difficult to get their head around how they could harness Chinese investment into the citrus industry to increase, grow, and add to our production levels. And I think this is the challenge. We can't be the food bowl of Asia in this part of the world, but we can be the delicatessen of Asia, and we can certainly sell into the premium market into Asia and into mainland China and their 600 million middle class. And we need to get our act together fairly quickly, because we need every smart person to be thinking about how we can enhance investment into agriculture to increase production and to increase exports at a premium price into the Asian region. And that's going to be a significant issue for the future. Other sectors, now I think services is going to be a big one. I think there are the big three. The first one is healthcare. This is a hospital I went to recently in Foshan in southern China. It's one of the top 3 private hospitals in China. China's medical system is very archaic and a bit bureaucratic and generally run by the public sector. It's only more recently that private entrepreneurs have got involved in healthcare, and we're starting to see a lot of interest in this sector. China has an aging population. They have an antiquated public system. They're now looking to import technology, medical devices, research, training people. They're looking to bring in everything from health supplements to pharmaceuticals. And of course, they're starting to show a great deal of interest in the aged care sector, a key issue for them. And also, I think one of the big trends we're going to see in the next 10 years will be medical tourism, as wealthy Chinese middle class and above people start traveling around the region looking for world-class healthcare. And everybody in this region can play a part in that. Again, we've got to start moving quite quickly to deliver a Chinese-centric experience with people who speak Chinese, with marketing materials and websites that are in Chinese language. And we need to welcome Chinese medical tourists to our local facilities. I've done quite a bit of research in this space, and from what I can see, I think we're a long, long way behind where we need to be. I think people at the top of healthcare organizations can see the vision and the opportunity, but I think the delivery of that is a long way behind where it needs to be to get even close to satisfying the demand that will come from China. And I hope we can address that soon. Education, I think we all know that there's a vast number of Chinese students traveling around the region, getting access to our local universities. I know that there's a lot of opportunity to increase that in the region overall, and I hope we will, because I don't think that these numbers are going to go away. Just in Australia, we have over 150,000 students, and we're starting to see them looking to go into new places as well. And then the last one, I thought I would touch on for a moment is tourism, because it's so relevant to everybody in this room. I think there's enormous opportunity here. Now, currently there's about 100 million tourists, Chinese tourists, traveling around the world. In Australia, we're very excited because we get about 1 million, and it's going to increase to about 3 million, which is great, but it's a long way from making a huge difference in this area. And of course, the Pacific Islands, this whole region as a whole, is going to see more and more Chinese tourists. But we have to do a much better job, I think, of looking after them. We need to create safe, secure, stable environments for them. We need local facilities that can deliver an experience in Chinese, written in Chinese, spoken in Chinese. And we need to get a lot better, I think, at building the relationships into China on air routes, on tourism routes, and so on. And I thought while I was talking about tourism, I thought I would just share a little story with you, because I know we've got Sir Fred here from Air Guinea, and I just wanted to share this little story for you. I've no idea how Sir Fred managed to create this air link to China into Shanghai, but let me just quickly tell you this story as an example of how business gets done with China. 2 years ago, I was at the what's called CFIT, the China Investment Fair for Investment and Trade. This is a massive annual event. It's in a city called Xiamen, which is very close to Taiwan in the southeast quarter. It's a huge event. It runs over 2 days. You've never seen so many people in one place before. There are stands for different countries, from different cities, from different sectors. I actually got to hear the great Jack Ma, who was the keynote presenter at the CFIT in 2015. And of course, he was greeted like a rock star that everybody thinks he is. There was business matching type speed dating. Individual meetings were set up on a grand scale. I mean, I've never seen matchmaking on that kind of scale from a business point of view. And I was there as part of a delegation that ran an Australian pavilion. And we had, I don't know, about 25 companies represented. And as you can see, it was very busy. Everybody was very interested in what Australia could offer. And most of the people that were there met many people over the course of those 2 days. But the reason I mention this is that quite close to the entrance to CFIT was a stand right in the middle of kind of nowhere. And that stand was the Sunshine Coast of Australia and was manned by, on the right there, Jenny Mackay, who is the Deputy Mayor of the Sunshine Coast. Now, I'm quite familiar with what the Sunshine Coast are doing. They've got a very big vision of what they want to achieve. And Jenny Mackay was driving this particular project, and she was standing on a limb in this huge information exhibition centre for CFIT in a stand for the Sunshine Coast. So we had this big Australian stand over here, and over here was the Sunshine Coast. And I chatted to her a little bit and asked her why she was here, and she said, "Oh, we were invited," she said, "and we're just here to meet a few people. The government of Xiamen was very keen for us to be represented. We made a fairly late decision. They asked us, so we accepted, so here we are." And she was just chatting to people and being a Queenslander. Which I thought was quite strange, really, because I couldn't understand the significance of it. And then 2 weeks later, there was an announcement that Xiamen Airlines, which is the local airline in Xiamen, had launched or were launching their Australian service, and that the flights from Xiamen were going to fly to Sydney and Maroochydore. And so, of course, what had happened was the Xiamen government had said that they would be very happy to do this deal, but only if the Sunshine Coast would be represented at their event, which is kind of how it works. And I think I take my hat off to Jenny Mackay. I haven't seen her recently. I think she did a fantastic job to win that route for Maroochydore when you think of all the other places that Xiamen Airlines could have flown. But here they are now, flying direct to Sydney and Maroochydore. We've also seen Wuhan flying to the Gold Coast. We now have Air Guinea flying to Shanghai, and no doubt other routes to come as well. We're going to see huge opportunity in tourism, and I think this is a great opportunity for everyone to play a part. Now, does anybody know this city? No? Really? It's not Shanghai, no. So this is the city of Chongqing, which has a population of 30 million people in central China, in the inner west region of China. Now, Chongqing is at the very heart of China's Go West strategy, which I want to just spend a moment on. Now, I'm going to give you a little history lesson about China because I've found that not everybody knows this, which surprises me. So I'm going to just tell you a few things about the modern development of China. Now, I used to live in Hong Kong, right down in the south. Now, when I was a child, all the toys were made in Hong Kong. Does anyone remember that? T-shirts, toys, made in Hong Kong. And that was in the 70s, 60s even, 60s and 70s. Now, China opened up in the south. You all know that. So when I went to Hong Kong, a lot of manufacturing was still in Hong Kong, but China had to open up. So in 1983, they signed the joint declaration with Hong Kong, where there was an agreement that Hong Kong would be handed back to China in 1997. I won't go over all that. And then in 1989, we had this terrible thing that happened in Tiananmen Square, which we don't talk about anymore, but that was in 1989. And so between 89 and in the early 90s, everybody stopped dealing with China. And in fact, many people have said that's the end of Chinese reform. It won't go any further. Now, at the time, the premier, or he wasn't actually a premier, but he was the sort of leader of China was Deng Xiaoping. In 1992, he traveled from Beijing down to Guangzhou in the south, and this was called his southern sweep as he went around the southern cities of China. And he said, what we need to do is to open up China to foreign investment starting down in the south. Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Foshan, and some of those cities that make up what we now call the Pearl River Delta, which actually is now a pretty big economy. That was opened up in the early 90s. Then, of course, once that had started, a lot of the Hong Kong entrepreneurs and wealthy business people moved their factories into this new region. It was a special economic zone. They were given tax concessions, and China opened up to the foreigners, but only down in the south, just to test out whether it was going to work or not, because they weren't sure. So while they were doing that, they then went to Shanghai. So about in the mid-90s, Deng Xiaoping went to Shanghai. He looked, I don't know how many of you have been to Shanghai, and stood on the bund, looked out over the eastern side of the river and seen all those skyscrapers. They never used to be there just 20 years ago. And Deng Xiaoping said, let's open up this eastern side of the river and start a financial services sector, which is what they did. So for the 90s and early 2000s, Shanghai went from a fairly dark, dismal place, I started going there in the 80s, to now a glittering city which is probably on everybody's mind, including Air Guinea, as the great center of Chinese excitement. And then, of course, we had the Olympics in 2008, so then there was a need to move economic activity up and investment up into the north. And we've started to see a lot of development up there with Beijing, with Shenyang, with Harbin in that northern, what they call their northern industrial heartland. So there's that three-step process. And as I said at the beginning, China tends to think in 10, 20, 30-year cycles. And so they're always planning ahead where they want to move economic activity. They can turn the tap on, they can turn the tap off. It's a very deliberate way of achieving the growth and the results that they want. Now, the next major move in terms of economic activity and investment is into this inner western region. And Chongqing is right in the middle of it. There you can see it right there on the Yangtze River. The heart of the Go West strategy. It's actually a municipality of Beijing, so the leaders of Chongqing report straight into Beijing. And some of the neighboring areas like Chengdu and Wuhan and Changsha are all part of this Go West strategy. So now, of course, when we think about China, we have to stop thinking about it as one country and one city or one or two cities. We now have to look at it as a new emerging country with many cities and many markets. So whereas we used to just think about China in terms of the first-tier cities, these white cities, we now need to think about these emerging second-tier cities. And the numbers there represent the growth rates. So the white cities are growing at 6, 7, 8%, as you'd expect from modern first-tier cities. But these cities like Chongqing, 30 million people, growing at 10.9%. That's 30 million people, an economy growing at 11%. That's pretty significant. That's a country in its own right. And many of us could do nothing but go to Chongqing and find there was more than enough to keep us busy. And we wouldn't need to go anywhere else. I spend a lot of my time persuading foreign business people to think about China in terms of which city do you want to go to. So when people say we have a China strategy, I say that's really interesting, but which part of China are you going to? And why? And what's special about that? And what do you expect to get out of that? And in my view, if you're only going to go to one part of China, go to one of these red emerging second-tier cities and build those links. And when I say the links, I mean the sister city relationships, the provincial relationships. They love government-to-government type relationships. So, as I said, Maroochydore and Xiamen did a great deal that resulted in now a new air route into Maroochydore. I think every Pacific island, every part of this region now needs to be building those sister city, sister province relationships, particularly with some of these emerging second-tier cities. And whilst I love going to Shanghai, great city, in fact, I'm going there next week, and it's a great place to go. There's lovely bars and restaurants. It's a fun town. It's glittering. The lights are great. But actually, it's a global city, and everybody's there. The Americans, the Europeans, everybody's fighting for the scraps that come out of Shanghai. Whereas you can go to Changsha or Wuhan, or even some of these others, Chengdu, and you can have the red carpet rolled out for you because they don't see so many foreigners and they don't have the opportunity to do business with foreign countries. And this is all part of what we call China going west. And then finally, and look, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but I'd like you to think about this afternoon. Another significant priority and strategic interest of China is going green. Now, those of us who've been to China know that it's a pretty polluted place. They have significant problems with water, with air, with soil, with waste, and they are spending hundreds of billions to fix it. In the process of going from nowhere to where they are today, they've trashed their environment. Industrial revolutions are no fun. If you've read the works of Charles Dickens, you know what London was like in the 1800s. Not a pretty place. China is going through their industrial revolution. They're about halfway through that process. And now they've realized that they can't continue to deteriorate their lifestyles and ruin their health and create all these problems if they don't clean up their environment. So they're spending billions in this area to effectively get access to more sustainable forms of energy, to clean up their environments. And every time we go to China, I take many people out of this part of the world who have an interest in exporting their capability. And China is really interested in working with them and investing in the technology and commercializing it and bringing it with them into China. So going out is about diversification, about access to new markets, learning how to do business overseas, learning about complex Western-style environments, and taking those learnings and innovation and technology and IP back to China. Going west is about moving economic activity from the eastern seaboard into the inner western regions, and going green is about trying to clean up their environment, getting access to world-class technology being developed around the region and the world, and bringing it back to China to fix some of the problems that they have. So some thoughts for all of you as you start thinking this afternoon about some of the opportunities and where China might fit into those. So here are my thoughts. Firstly, work together. This is a big opportunity. Like, it's bigger than all of us combined, no matter everybody doing it on their own. I get very frustrated in this country that everybody works in silos. You can't get them working together to build a strategic high-level plan. So we can't have that in the region. So the Pacific Islands needs to work together to face China, to work in the areas that I've talked about in terms of inbound investment, going into their western regions and going green. Play to your strengths, and tourism obviously is a major strength. We have to upgrade, we have to Chinify our experience in the tourism sector. Build strategic relationships into China, particularly at government level, government to government, sister city relationships, sister province relationships, country to country type focuses. We have to get really good at that. That's the way the Chinese like to operate. We need to get better at doing that. We're not good at that, and we need to progress that pretty quickly. We all need to engage in the One Belt, One Road, which starts in the South Pacific, ends in Barking. We all need to be part of that journey in terms of infrastructure, investment, trade, investment. And we need to get started. And we need to get started now.